while the sort of backwater scientific group is saying, aha, we found the poliovirus and we know that we've done that by injecting um, ground up spinal fluid into monkey brains. We are seeing the rise of childhood paralysis in the country. I mean, this is real, right? We actually are seeing this. But what that actually matched with was the use of new chemicals in the country. And the first of these was lead arsenic. And it was a new compound that had been created in Paris, which is in the 1800s is kind of the heart of the chemical industry. It switches over to the United States soon after, but there's this chemical, it's called Paris green, and it's used for all sorts of different things. And what we saw very clearly is that with the rise of the use of this chemical, we see the rise of childhood paralysis. And it's not sort of abstract thing. It's in the exact towns and villages where this chemical is being used that we see the paralysis.
Mike Wally Wallach, as he's known, is a freelance filmmaker. His film, The Viral Delusion, features scientists, doctors, and journalists who lay out the case that the scientific papers upon which the pandemic is based, when looked at closely, are pseudoscience. In his film, The Viral Delusion, they explore every major claim, from the isolation of the virus to its so-called genetic sequencing, the discovery of how they test for SARS-CoV-2, and the emergence of variants that exist only on a computer. Mike is the screenwriter for The Bay, directed by Oscar-winning filmmaker Barry Levinson. He is also in development for The Abduction with Paranormal Activity producer Steven Schneider, The Politics of Heroin with Essential Films, The Jury Room in development with EKO Productions, and the documentary The Lie of the Century. For more information on Mike's work, visit michaelwallach.com. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Naturally Inspired Podcast with Michael Wallach. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me for the Naturally Inspired Podcast today. I'm going to be the first to say your docuseries, your documentary was hard for me to watch. It was, stuff I knew, but the visual presentation was very impactful, especially the stuff, talking about the way we think about disease, what we've been taught about about viruses, how we've come to fear our own health. These things, it feels so big, right? This problem feels so big sometimes. It's overwhelming because you think, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to fix this? We're talking about, decades of programming to think a certain way about our health. And your documentary really outlined that for me. I had to take breaks. I'm glad you did it in parts because it was, we'd watch one and then we kind of debrief about it and move on to the next one, over the course of time, then the next one. Because there was so much there, but it did leave me feeling like, holy crap, how are we ever going to get people to realize the truth about health and how we've been manipulated? So thank you so much for doing that and for dedicating your life to this issue of health and the paradigm that we are living in. And I love that you, is it the name of your film company, Paradigm Shift?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Let's start there.
Well, I was, for the last 10 years of my life, 15, I've been writing scripts for Hollywood. And I realized when the depth of this story really hit me, I knew a lot of it, but like all of us, when COVID started, it sort of plunged a lot of us into asking really foundational questions about what's going on. And the more I delved into this particular story, the more I realized that the story really should be told, and obviously Hollywood wasn't going to tell it.
Yeah.
So I decided to just do it myself, and I called a friend of mine, Diara, and said, "Hey, do you want to go make a documentary together about this?" And he agreed. And at first I really wasn't sure if all of the doctors and scientists that we interviewed would respond to me because I had never made a documentary before,
Hmm.
and they're such incredible figures. But what I discovered, of course, was that they were dying to tell their story, and they were thrilled that somebody was actually going to document this. And so, all of a sudden, I went from kind of being scared that they were going to that they were not going to take my call to um, meeting with some of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. One after the next, and it was amazing, and having really deep conversations. And we got to the point where the documentary is the documentary series is 7.5 hours long, and I had to leave really brilliant people that we interviewed on the cutting room floor
Oh
because we just didn't
gosh,
have room for them.
that must
We
have been
could keep
hard.
going. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really hard. But there were even
Yeah.
some people who were upset, and one of the great things is I get to sort of talk about some of the people that we didn't get in the documentary, in these interviews where we can keep expanding on the story to help people understand what's really going on.
Right.
And so for me, it's just been an incredible experience where, I've like I was telling somebody the other day, like COVID's been great. This whole thing's been great for me because first of all, we live, up until a couple months ago, we lived in the woods, and we didn't really have to deal with, that much with all the nonsense in some ways. And then at the same time, I'm meeting some of the greatest minds in the country and around the world, and learning from them, and hopefully passing that on. So it's been a great experience, and I hope other people can get something out of it besides me.
I agree. I mean, I've had the opportunity to interview just some fascinating people, and we're looking at things differently now. I think for me, I had a background of understanding big pharma, understanding the dynamic that goes on in healthcare already. We all have experiences, and that's one thing that I think really COVID has highlighted, that it's not about your intellect or your level of education or anything else. It really is about your experience. You see people from all walks of life making different decisions, and I have to attribute that to experience. I had an experience with healthcare where I started to question it, and that was kind of the turning point for me, where I no longer took medical advice blindly without looking into it. And now we see more people coming to that point. Did you have an experience like that? Is that kind of did you have some kind of background?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There were really kind of two experiences. The first was about 15 years ago. My wife got really sick, and she had severe arthritis, and became really difficult for her to walk. And
And she's young, right?
oh, she was 30 at the time,
Yeah.
you know. And so she started going to all these rheumatologists. We were living in New York City, so she was looking up the best rheumatologists in New York City and going to them and speaking to them, and they were all saying the same thing, which is that it's just early onset arthritis. It's probably genetic. There's nothing they can do, and fundamentally, and their only recommendation was for her to start taking a regular steroid treatment, which if she looked up, if she had done that, significantly increased your chances of dying in your 50s.
Sure.
So there was that, and then their other suggestion was buy a really good cane. That was it. And so,
At
here was my
30.
like, yeah, 30. And I mean, she's beautiful. And she's walking down Sixth Avenue in Brooklyn with a cane and tears in her eyes. And we didn't know what to do. Um, we happened upon a doctor. We heard about a doctor who had been the chief pathologist at a hospital and had left in frustration and started his own practice because he was so frustrated with the Orthodox medical system. And we went to go see him. My wife went to go see him. And he looked at her and said, "Are you a professional athlete?" And she's like, "No, I'm definitely not a professional athlete." And he said, "Okay, well, what does your bathroom look like?" And she was like, "That's such a weird question, but I hate my bathroom." And he was like, "Yeah, is the paint peeling on the walls?" She said, "Yeah, all on the top." He said, "Okay, we'll run some tests, but you almost certainly have a mold allergy and got to get out of that bathroom, get out of that apartment, and you'll be fine." And so we left that apartment right away, and she was fine. And that was 15 years ago. And for a year, she was walking with a cane and in severe pain. And for 15 years, ever since, she's been completely fine.
It's just
Um,
remarkable.
yeah, it's amazing. And so that was really that really opened my eyes to the fact that the mainstream medical system not only doesn't have all the answers, they often have the wrong answers. I mean, a wrong answer. And it also opened my eyes to a lot of things. Later on, looking back now, I realized that he was trying to teach us a lesson about where disease comes from. And we're taught by the Orthodox medical system that disease is either genetic or bad luck. Those are
Yeah.
essentially um, the two sources. Oh, you just happened to catch a virus. It's just bad luck. It was just floating in the air and
Idiopathic,
caught it.
right? I
What's
mean,
that?
idiopathic is an explanation for them, which means we don't know, right? We don't know why it happened. In the alternative space, which it's not alternative medicine, I hate that term alternative, but in more natural based medicine, we're constantly being criticized that we're practicing magic, or it's like witch
Yeah.
doctory, that type of stuff. Well, you're expecting us to believe that there's no reason for our diseases, that they just happen. So who's actually pitching the witch doctory stuff here? Because it's not us.
I mean, I could talk for hours just on that alone. I mean, if you go back to the foundations of Rockefeller medicine, and 100 years ago, and what was Rockefeller doing? He was selling petroleum
Yep.
as a cure for stomach pain,
Yeah.
and then
Rock
it
oil
just
elixir.
it's just fraud. I mean, yeah. Um,
Yep.
it's just shocking once you start peeling back the layers on the whole thing. So um, yeah, so the second phase, and the last thing that just to share is kind of a funny story is, we went in to see him again because we did a checkup with this doctor, a couple months later, and of course, my wife was fine at that point, and he came into the room and he grabbed my hand and he grabbed my wife's hand, and he said, all the children that have died in Iraq, all the children that have died from the sanctions before the Iraq War, just all of that pales in comparison to the Lipitor scam alone, right?
Yes.
And he said, never trust a word you read in the New Enron Journal of Medicine, which was his name for the New England Journal of Medicine. So
Yeah.
all of that was really interesting to me. Like, I was just your sort of normal day-to-day, consumer of the Orthodox medical system, the way people
Sure.
consume McDonald's or Wendy's. It's not food, and it's not medicine many times.
That's right. And
And
so
so,
your background growing up, you didn't grow up with these radical parents that, didn't have you immunized, or you were eating, granola all the time. That's not your
oh my God, I
upbringing.
come from the most like conservative, regular, like community, like I grew up in Washington, D.C. Like my dad was friends with like all these politicians. He was, a reporter. Like it was like I grew up completely within the mainstream, like within like many circles of the mainstream,
Right, right.
and nobody, nobody at my school would really question anything like this. I mean, it wasn't just me, right? Like it was
Yeah,
everybody in my community. So, no, I had to learn all this for myself,
right.
um,
An experience. And
to this
that
day,
goes
I
back
still.
to the point that I was saying, like, it's not about intellect or being a genius or, figuring stuff out. It really, your experience is your perception. You have to have that kind of moment that jars you where you're like, wait, this doesn't fit with the story I'm being told here.
Absolutely. And not only that, I mean, I think it does run the other way as well. Because once you start opening up your eyes a little bit, you start seeing your own experiences with a wider lens. And all of a sudden, you don't have to interpret them the way that you've been taught to interpret them. And
Yeah.
that's also really important. And I can tell lots of examples from my own life about how just stepping back um, helped me to reinterpret what I was experiencing in a much more healthy way.
Yeah.
And that's been great. I mean, that's just been absolutely life changing.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to give a really small example, and again, I could talk for hours about that.
I
But
can too. So we could be in trouble here.
yeah, great. Well, my afternoon's free, so um, so so the second phase, and because I'll come back to this point, the sort of second phase of my education on these topics was when my wife got pregnant, and she said to me, "Hey, let's do our vaccine research." And again, I was like so conservative, like the idea of doing vaccine research kind of like gave me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, and it was like, "Oh, really? Are we really going to look at that question?
Right. Do we need to
Wow,
waste our time looking at this?
exactly. Like,
Isn't the science
ooh,
solved?
right? Are we going to like taint ourselves somehow? Like, like,
Yeah.
like,
Oh, I
you
paid
know,
for extra vaccinations for my kid
oh,
in Canada. Because
oh,
that's how yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah.
So we're so indoctrinated that,
Yes.
something I talk about a lot is that the system is built not just to fill your cup with what you think you know, but the system is built to make you think that you know what other people have to say as well.
Yes.
And that is I think um, so pernicious about the propaganda system is it not only tells you what to think,
Yep.
it also tells you why you shouldn't listen to all these other people.
It
Actually,
trains you
it's
as a
not representing
soldier.
them properly.
Yeah. You're a
Yeah,
soldier of the information.
absolutely.
You have to guard it and you have to shut the other stuff down. That's what it controls you to, it conditions you to be.
Yeah. Um, so when we actually started opening up books and reading about the world of the critical literature on vaccines, all the critical history, um, I discovered something that I really didn't expect to discover at all, which was I kind of wasn't surprised that vaccines were dangerous. Like that didn't totally shock me.
Hmm.
Um,
That's interesting. I
what
was. I
oh
was
no,
shocked.
it was kind of like it was what really shocked me was that the story that they're actually responsible for eradicating disease is totally fictional. It's an entirely fictional story. That
Wildly,
blew me away.
wildly so. Yeah.
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 And that once that became clear to me, and it's really obvious from the historical literature, um, then everything changed. And it was like, okay, there's just no way we're going to participate in this. There's no way.
Yeah.
And it was really shocking. So then we ended up having a discussion. So my wife went to her normal gynecologist or obstetrician, I don't remember, and talked about vaccines. And the doctor, basically just, my wife started asking questions, and the doctor just kind of yelled at her and just said,
Yes.
listen, I
Very
do it.
defensive. Yeah.
I do it. She said, tried to position herself as kind of new agey, or like, she's like, I eat organic food and I take the vaccine, of course. And I was like, okay, you don't have to yell at me. And also, that's a really ridiculously, uh, unsubstantiated way of talking about this issue. Like, then we called a doctor who was anti-vax, and wanted to go see what he had to say. And he sat us down. We went into his office. He was so busy that it took us 3 months to get on his calendar. And
Wow. That's
yeah,
telling.
yeah. And when we went in there and we started asking questions, he sat us down and he answered our questions for 3 hours, sitting in his office for 3 hours. And we just peppered him, and he would just talk and answer them as best he could. And it was really phenomenal.
Yeah.
And one, I remember walking away from that meeting and thinking to myself, this new insight, which now is just super obvious to me, but at the time it was like this wildly new insight. And it was the idea that if you're sick, you need to take a really careful look at your surroundings, at what you're eating, at what you're drinking. Where's the food coming from? Where's the water coming from? What is in your environment? Because all these things can make you sick. And
Yes. I like to focus on, like, did you inject it? Did you ingest it? Did you inhale it?
absolutely, that's the 3 I's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it was only a couple weeks later that our son, who was 1 at the time, got a fever, and he was really he was pretty sick. And we were like, what do we do? Like, we don't want to give him Tylenol. Um, we are worried about him. Our sweet little baby has a
Oh, it's
fever.
so hard when they're sick.
Yes, it's so hard.
It's
And
nothing's worse.
yeah, exactly.
Consumes your thoughts.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting in our like tiny apartment in Brooklyn and looking at my son and walking around trying to figure out what to do. And I realized that he had just started crawling um, only a couple weeks earlier, and maybe a month earlier. And we had just bought a new rug from West Elm, it was. And I sit down and I feel the rug and I look at it and I realize all he's doing all day is crawling around in this rug and breathing in these tiny little plastic fibers. And I looked at my wife and I said, I think I know what's going on. And she said, oh my God, that's of course. And the first thing we did is we moved all the furniture, we rolled up the rug, we vacuumed the apartment, and he got better the next day. And that was that. So once you become, for me, as I said, I could talk for hours about stories like this, because once I became aware of this way of thinking, this much, much more common sense, simple, but much more deeply rooted way of thinking, it really, it's made our lives a million times better in so many different ways. I mean, we eat better, it's more delicious. We drink better water, it's more satisfying. We breathe better air. like our whole lives are better. And when we're sick, we think deeply about what's going on.
Yes.
And we're almost always able to find the solution. Not
Yeah.
always, but many, many, many times.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's a little bit of background.
That's amazing. What was COVID, your COVID story? I always like to kind of get people's first impression when COVID came down the pipe. Were you the one that was like, okay, wait, something's going on here right away? Or were you kind of like, oh, wow, something's happening? Because we were at first like, oh, okay, something's happening here. We did we did the stay in your house, the quarantine thing. We were like, but that was kind of the worst thing they could have done for us because what did we do? We read. we read and we started looking into things and we were like, oh boy, okay, something's happening. So what was it like for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, what a fascinating experience and time for us all, right? I mean, what an
I did not
incredible
see it
experience.
coming though, Michael. I mean, I'm a little annoyed. I did not see it coming. I didn't.
Yeah,
I knew
I
that the healthcare system would have a breaking point at some point that we couldn't be living in a lie, forever. I just didn't think I was going to be alive to see it, to be honest.
yeah, it was really amazing. There were so many things that happened in that brief period of like 3 or 4 months of the first 3 or 4 months of COVID. I don't even know where to begin. Um, I because of all of our research, I had a pretty suspicious eye raised towards whatever the mainstream medical narrative was of the day.
Right.
Um, and I mean, and it really goes into so many different issues. Like my wife's done all this fabulous research on nutrition and all the myths around that. You know, so we're talking about this in our house all the time.
Yes,
Um,
so are we.
and it's fun. It's great.
And you're solving a mystery every
Yeah,
day.
exactly. And yeah, and learning how to like get back to this really wonderful way of living.
Yes, and
But
that's such a good point. It's not a new way of living. It's an old way of living.
yeah, I mean, if there's a takeaway, and I know we haven't gotten to talk about the documentary yet, which I really want to talk about. But yeah, I mean, if there's a takeaway, I mean, I think one of the big takeaways is that one of the big messages that I think the whole system is trying to sell people on is the idea that in order to be healthy and in order to be happy, we need um, the salvation of modern technology, and um, that's a huge lie. I mean, that's just a huge lie.
Yes.
Um, but we're constantly being sold that, whether it's GMO food or GMO injections or whatever the latest testing equipment is. In order to be healthy, you require this. You require their tests. You require their algorithms. You require their technological advances in medicine, and it's
Yeah.
just not true.
No, and it's a complete disregard for the symbiotic nature of how we are supposed to live with the earth, with a give and take to work the land and to receive benefit from the land. There's a complete disregard for that. And we've seen that play out just perfectly, unfortunately, in India with the rise of Indian farmers committing suicide with no purpose. It's not just about taking away their ability to farm and food and stuff. It's taking away their reason for living.
Yeah, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
we're silly if we think because we live in America that doesn't apply to us. We're all humans.
Oh yeah.
I don't understand this disconnect. Like you think that only affects farmers in India. If you haven't been with your feet in the dirt for 20 years, there's a consequence to that.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of mind blowing that they've been able to indoctrinate everybody so fully. But one of the things that the system does is it just continues to churn and move forward, whether or not you're coming along or not. And
Yeah.
so you just kind of get swept up in the whole thing. And if you don't actually take a stand and put your feet in the ground, then you just kind of get pushed along.
Yeah.
And you get pushed along to your own death, frankly, literally to your own death.
Yep.
And I've watched, I mean, there's more than, I mean, we'll probably talk about this later on, but there's more than 10 people that I know in my immediate world, family members or friends or, maybe friends of friends, but I think it's like almost up to 15 people in my immediate world who died or gotten severe cancer in the last 6 months. I've never had anything like that before. Like,
Wow.
that's just extraordinary. So, but most of them, the vast majority of them, if not all of them, literally have no idea what's going on. So
Yes.
they are like, my baby in the rug, where it looks like disease came from nowhere, and it looks like the only answer is Tylenol,
Yeah.
and that's that. So, sort of getting to the heart of all this is really important. Now, I also was, I have to say, also fueled in doing my research at the beginning of COVID, because my brother attacked me very publicly really early on in COVID.
Oh.
And I was really like shocked by that. And that was really just a strange experience, where he wrote a letter to the New York Times talking about how I was an irresponsible father for homeschooling my son and for not vaccinating him.
Holy man.
And the New York Times ran it on the back page of the Sunday edition of the paper. And this was right at the beginning of COVID. And there were like thousands of people commenting like, oh my God, what an irresponsible, person he
Wow.
is. I am.
That.
So the emotional depth, the fact that this was going to hit really hard on a lot of people, that was I probably got like an early
Signal.
salvo of
Yeah.
that. It
Yeah.
was like particularly clear to me early on, like, oh, this is going to get really deep and it's going to get really nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. There was some foreshadowing of that for us, just because we had stopped vaccinating early because my son was injured by a vaccine when he was 2, a flu shot that caused thrombocytopenia. And much like your experience, we had doctors that did not know what it was. My husband actually left the emergency room hospital, went home to do the research, and discovered what it was. And when he brought it back, the doctors were like, oh, well, this is idiopathic. This is just happens for no reason. But my daughter was born premature, and RSV is a real concern for preemies. So it's touted. And we were kind of, railroaded into taking a flu shot, having my daughter be a premature, which we had never done before. And then 10 days later, my son had thrombocytopenia. It was very serious, very serious. He was down to single digit platelets. So it was, probably if not the, very close to the worst situation I've ever been in my life. And so that kind of jarred us awake. After that, we knew we had to be personally responsible for our decisions, that we, couldn't just blindly trust people anymore. And that kind of opened Pandora's box for us. But going to schools and, the schools that my kids were in at the time, I always just laid low. I didn't want the conversation. I filled out the exemption forms, and it just felt too much work to have the conversation with people who just didn't want to hear it. And I always just kind of, skated under the radar. And then even I had already started my podcast before COVID, because I wanted to get this message out to people that, hey, there's more than pills and procedures here. You can do other stuff. And that was solely going to be my message with this podcast. But then this whole COVID thing hit, and it's like, okay, you said God's like, oh, I'll let you get away with not talking about the vaccine for a while. And then COVID hit, was like, yeah, you're not going to get away with it. You're going to have to talk about it. It just proved to me that our experiences truly are for our benefit. You're going through what you're going through for a reason. And all we can do is try to understand what that reason is and then put it to work. And you may be feeling like that listening to this, our audience. Why are we going through this? Why are you going through these painful experiences with your family? Because most of us are. If you've been against the narrative, most of us are going through painful experiences with our family members. And it's so difficult to understand. But you're not alone.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your baby. So what happened with your baby?
Well, he's 19 now. We stopped vaccinating right after that. It was about a 6-month recovery period. If you get thrombocytopenia under the age of 5, you're very highly likely to recover. So thankfully, with prayer and just dedication to nutrition, and just never losing hope, we were able to get him to recover. And, but it brought up a lot of things because he was fully vaccinated. And like I said, I paid for additional vaccinations for him because I didn't know. This kid suffered with respiratory problems his whole childhood. If something was going around, he got it. He was that type of kid. But through just research, his diet, I think, is a huge part of it. He's like a thriving 19-year-old athlete that has no, issues at all today. But yeah, like he's been to the doctor like 5 times his whole life, I think.
That's great.
Yeah. And my daughter, thankfully, we stopped early with her because of our experience. So she got like microdose, the first dose, because she was just a baby, and hers were delayed already because she was premature. And then we stopped, and that kid never gets sick. If she gets a cold or whatever, she's over it immediately. With my son, it's 10, 12 days. It used to be when he was young to get him over something. It was just like night and day watching them. So we had kind of a live experience going on in our home.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much research on, there's so many studies that have been done on vaccinated versus unvaccinated health. And it's just, it's night and day. It's night and day when you see these studies. A friend of mine's a doctor here, and she just did a study in upstate New York, and it was just she just did a new one, and where she tracked down every single homeschool family in Ulster County, which is where we lived. She tried to do it all in New York State, but it became too hard. But she found every single homeschool family in the county, and then compared and they were of course almost entirely unvaccinated, and compared their health to the norm.
Yeah.
And it's just the vaccinated are often 10 times more sick, 15 times more sick, 40 times more sick.
Yeah.
My wife was just reading about a study, I think, that said that it generally the serious disease rate is of an unvaccinated is 2% that of the vaccinated over their lifetime.
Yeah.
So again, once you actually read the critical literature and you see what's going on, and then you compare that to the mythology that is out there, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. But we are living in a world that has an actual political and economic history to it.
Yes.
Unless we're aware of that, we're not able to make informed decisions.
Yeah, I'm doing some research for some writing I'm doing, and I just recently saw like a 2022 industry list, and the top industry in our country right now is hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at the history of American medicine, the total percent of GDP that used to be spent on medical care 100 years ago was about 2 to 3%, and now it's at about 20%. So 20% of our
And we're sicker
GDP,
than ever.
and we're sicker than ever. Absolutely, absolutely. And the advances in health that have occurred over that 100 years have nothing to do with the medical. And this has been acknowledged in the medical literature.
Yep.
I mean, we published some of these papers in the documentary series.
Yeah.
It's not, these papers aren't heralded. They're not talking
Yeah.
about them at the CDC or the
They're in the
NIH.
back drawer, way back. You
Yeah,
got to really
way
dig.
back.
Yes. You got to really
It's,
dig.
but it's been published
Yep.
and made clear that the advances in the general health of the American public are due to reasons outside of the healthcare system itself.
Yes.
They're due to advances in nutrition that chiefly happened from 1900 to 1940, and sanitation.
Yeah, sanitation is huge. Let's get into the docuseries. I want to talk about part 1 first. This idea of the existence of the virus. Can you talk about that? Because I think this is the biggest argument that we're facing to get people to understand this concept.
Yeah, I mean, even given my 10 years of medical research that I had been doing, kind of off and on, ever since we started looking at vaccine, when the outline of this argument began to emerge for me, I was like pretty shocked. But I really wanted to dig into it and understand what exactly were these scientists saying. And so, I mean, some of the first stuff that I saw was, Andrew Kaufman's analysis of the first scientific papers that came out of Wuhan.
Mm-hmm.
And he very clearly laid out that there was no serious science happening in these papers, which were supposed to be the justification for the entire pandemic. They were the papers in which it had been claimed that a new virus had been found.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating was here he was walking through the methodology sections of these papers, pointing out that the methodology just didn't make any sense. I mean, it didn't meet the standard of a science fair. Yet,
but to the lay person, we're not able to detect that. We don't even know necessarily what scientific papers are supposed to look like. So, there's a group of people that are qualified or used to, I shouldn't say the word qualified. I don't like to say that because I think anyone's qualified if you can read and seek to understand what it means. Then you could decipher it. But too much of the public, and they know that the public's never going to look into it deeper in the masses.
Exactly. And hopefully,
because it's actually kind of a gong show. The paper's like a gong show. It's like anybody that, I mean, it just, yeah. If you know what you're looking at.
Yeah, it's right there in your face. If you know what you're looking for, if you know how to read these papers and understand them. But the vast majority of people don't, and that includes doctors. That includes
and we have in this movement, we have kind of a sect off too. Like I just interviewed Dr. Richard Fleming, right? Which he believes the virus exists. He believes, all of that stuff. And I understand where he's coming from, but like, I just. This is the sect here that we have going, right? We have a group of professionals that understands the premise of the virus, where, that it didn't come naturally, but they're still fighting this battle. And I can't help but think that that's because the conditioning of their schooling just simply won't allow them to come apart from that narrative. Because if it does, then who are they? And what have they been studying their whole life? Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I definitely understand what
I mean, I've thought about this a lot. I'm
Yes.
like, how do these people who are like so incredibly smart, so like you've got like like Fleming has a ton of credentials, right? Like and they mean a lot to him. And I get that. And they should. It's a lot of time. But at the same time, is that poisoning the critical thinking at all? I have to wonder that because people like McCullough also think the viruses exist. It's a mess.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you know, they're priests within, you know, a scientific cult, and even if they break away a little bit, it's very hard for them to simply give up their robes
Yeah.
and and recognize that the the whole institution has been perverted by what I call scientific fascism,
Mm-hmm.
which is really um, the type of scientific research that began again at the beginning of the 20th century and then went through different phases. So after World War II, there was another huge phase where scientific research was, you know, really controlled, and a lot of money was invested by the cartels, by the pharmaceutical cartels, in particular avenues of research that they wanted to propagandize people about. And then we went through another phase that started in the 90s and culminated in COVID today,
Yeah.
what we call the discovery of SARS-CoV-2. So it's a system that's really large. It's very you know, we're talking about hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars that have been spent over, you know, 100 years.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for people to walk away from that system. That doesn't mean that the emperor has clothes. He doesn't.
Right.
He doesn't. And so, you know, that's we need to be able to talk about it
Oh
because
my gosh. That's and I think that's the platform we stand on. Like there's enough if even if you don't believe it on this side, right? If you adhere to the classic allopathic Rockefeller medicine model, you can acknowledge that there's enough of an argument on the other side that we need to discuss it, right?
yeah,
I mean, you would think that they would be able to come around to that point instead of this kind of arrogant, with science, you know, that's craziness. That's, you know, that's when you're doing that, it tells me your argument isn't strong enough. It's just not strong enough for you to have the discussion.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, I would love to, you know, and people like Dr. Fleming, McCullough, they're playing a really great role in many ways in waking up the
People.
public
Yeah.
to like the most obvious scams that are going on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yes.
And and that's great. And they're I have a lot of respect for them in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But this continued talk about the virus and the dangers of the virus really insidious, and I don't think they even understand that. But
Right.
what's been really disturbing is that most of them aren't willing to face that conversation
Mm-hmm.
and just have the conversation openly, publicly.
Do you think it
Uh,
could be a way to unify? Like sometimes I feel like there was doctors that would even give into the mask, right? Okay, just wear the mask because it's just a minor, but they knew damn well the mask wasn't doing anything, you know, but they felt like that could be a unifying, you like, see, I'm not all bad. I'm gonna go along with part of you, part of the narrative to kind of build a bridge. Sometimes I feel like that's what some of these doctors are doing.
yeah,
It doesn't make it
uh,
right, but I'm just trying to understand.
yeah. I mean, I remember doing an interview with an unnamed doctor. I won't say who it was, but she's very well known in the anti-vax community and very outspoken, and very well respected. And in the interview, I brought up the issue of the virus and, you know, what's her take. And she started saying, well, you know, of course the virus is real and blah blah blah. And I started asking her questions about the science behind it, and it became immediately clear to me. I mean, it didn't take more than a minute, that she had never studied it. She had no understanding of it. She had no, she didn't have this tiniest inkling of what the methodologies are behind the entire field. And it was like nonsense. It was this gobbledygook that was coming out of her mouth. And I felt embarrassed for her, and I just decided not to use the
Pursue
interview
it.
at all.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But this happens again. I mean, almost every single time. I
Hmm.
mean, there's a discussion with somebody who's all excited about the virus or the lab leak virus or whatever it is. Once you engage them in a serious conversation, they actually don't know anything, and
Yeah.
it's really shocking. I mean, about this topic,
Yeah.
So, um, you know, some Dr. Bailey said early on, when she first started talking about this issue, it was so shocking to her that she kept waiting for the other foot to fall.
Yeah.
She kept waiting for like that moment to occur when they pull out of their drawer, oh, but don't you know we did this experiment, we and this proves our point. And eventually she realized, oh my God, they don't have that paper. They never did that
Right.
experiment. This is a scam.
Yeah.
The whole thing is a scam. And unfortunately, it has massive buy-in, very deep institutional, so-called scientific buy-in.
Right.
And so, and obviously, doctor buy-in. So there's a long road to go, but it's not. It's super interesting, and it'll change your life once you understand it. So
Yes.
I think it's amazing.
Well, that's really interesting. I think that, even Dr. Fleming was saying, he explained to me, because I pushed a little bit on the fact that, doctors are speaking out, but there's no explanation about the virus itself. And he made the analogy of, saying basically there's good doctors, that dig deeper. Like a lot of doctors I've interviewed over the course of the last 3 years or so, or even more, have made the kind of confession that, allopathic medicine wasn't what they thought it was going to be going into it. They wanted to help people, and then they realized that the tools weren't actually there to help
mm,
people.
mhm,
And when I said that to Dr. Fleming, he argued back that it was that, there are good doctors and there are okay doctors, and then there are bad doctors like anything else. And, everyone always says that there's no nutrition class in medical school. And he would refute that and say, it's up to the doctor to look into the nutrition. Like you're supposed to be factoring that in. No, there's no nutrition class, but this is like part of medicine. And anyone that's worth their weight in salt kind of thing as a doctor should be doing that anyway. So that was kind of his take on that. But that could be, you know, projected onto the virus itself too. Like any good doctor would look into to the virus and look into the mechanisms of how that came to be, but they don't. And they're not starting from the foundation of microbiology. They're starting from the foundation of, starting patient care. Like, how do I treat? How do I treat? They're not, how do I fix? Or how do I solve problems? They're, how do I treat? They're asking the wrong question.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like I was like, like there's so many things that I want to say in response to what you were talking about. I mean, like even Aristotle, thousands of years ago, divided medicine into two categories: slave medicine and free medicine.
Mm,
And the medicine for slaves was treat the symptoms. Uh, give them something that will allow them to go back to work.
yeah.
And the medicine for free people was to understand what was happening in their lives and treat the soul. And that if you could really understand what was happening spiritually for somebody, you could find the cause of disease in their experience, in their world. And I think that we're still living through those two systems today.
Yeah.
And
I think a
I
portion of
agree.
sorry, go ahead. No, go
I mean,
ahead.
I agree with Dr. Fleming that that it's up to the doctor and truly up to each of us to think critically about what's going on in our lives, especially our health.
Mhm.
So, yeah, obviously, doctors should be doing this kind of research, obviously.
Yeah.
But so much of their training is not about that, and it's to ignore that. And they're also operating, unless you are can recognize that you have to be proactive about reading critical literature if you want to understand what's going on. Um, you're operating from an uninformed place, and it's hard. Like nutrition. Like one of the things, there's a really um, well-known nutritionist who called me after seeing the documentary and invited me over to his house, and we talked, and it was really nice. It was one of these like great, fascinating minds that I got to speak to after the doc. And he said, "Look, it was really clear, around 1900, that nutrition was incredibly important to health." Because the country had just been through the pellagra experience, and which was thought to be a contagious disease, but turned out to be a nutritional deficiency.
Mm.
And scurvy before that had happened, where it was thought to be a contagious disease, but it turned out to be a nutritional deficiency. And
Yeah.
so, right around the turn of the century, there was an enormous amount of research that was being done in nutrition. And the other main area of another huge area of research was in toxicology. So, what poisons are out there? And this was a really pressing issue at the time because we'd seen the rise of the industrial era,
Right.
and there were all of these new poisons
Pollutants.
and
Yeah.
chemicals that were in our environment. And a very earnest, I think, response to that. And we were still looking at what I would call like a more local and free scientific world.
Hmm.
Wasn't dominated by a central financial power.
Right.
And so this was just common sense, was to investigate, well, what are people eating and what poisons or toxins are in their
Hmm.
environment to make them sick. And those fields were growing very rapidly. They were it's from that period that we even get the idea of a vitamin, right?
Yes.
Vita means something essential to health, and it becomes, I think, a really a topic that really needs its whole own conversation, because where it goes and what that whole conversation looks like and becomes is very complicated, or at least
Hmm.
I don't fully understand it, but I know it has some serious issues. But
Yes.
anyway, the idea that eating healthy would be good for you and that staying away from poisons would be good for you, this is simple and understood, and these were growing fields.
Yes.
Um, but
Until the
they
petrochemical.
exactly
And
until
this
the
is one thing I
takeover.
think people need to really pay attention to, because in the 1900s is when, early 1900s is when they discovered, this ability to manufacture even vitamins at that point, using petrochemicals. And once they discovered that, there was this huge push to shut down things like nutrition, to shut down homeopathic remedies that were working, because that's what was largely being used at that time. And then, it's interesting that the petro was part of our medicine, the prescriptions and the pharmaceutical company that they were developing, petro being, a huge part of our economy, obviously. Now, today, we are looking at, technology and this link to technology in our health. So back then, it was, oil and our health. And now it's technology, artificial intelligence, and our health. There's a parallel there, right? They're tying those two things together. Why? Why?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we see is that once this takeover really is firmly entrenched, and universities that are willing to play along with Rockefeller and the medical cartels are earning millions of dollars in grants, and ones that aren't are being heavily criticized and attacked. We see the research agenda completely change, and there's far less, I mean, minuscule amounts of money that start, for people who want to research nutrition. There's minuscule amounts of money for people who want to research toxicology. And there's huge grant opportunities for people who want to blame or investigate the idea that there are nearly invisible particles or invisible particles called viruses, which are making people sick. And so we see the rise of this pseudoscientific establishment in the beginning of the 20th century, and then massively in the 1950s. And it goes from there. But the whole thing is built on pseudoscience. It never actually proves itself. And that's the really shocking thing. So when I first started learning this story, and I was like, what could that possibly be true? That throws out so many things that I know,
Right.
That I think I know. And I was like, wow, how could that possibly be true? And so I started sort of ticking off and going through diseases that we talk about as being viral. And there were two diseases that I already knew all about. And one was polio and one was smallpox. And I thought to myself about polio and smallpox, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's definitely true for polio, and it's definitely true for smallpox. These were not viral diseases. This is completely clear from the historical record. There's no doubt about it. So I thought, my God, but what about AIDS? Doesn't AIDS seem like a viral disease? I mean, I grew up in the AIDS era. So I was a teenager when the AIDS scare came down, and it was terrifying. I mean, it was really scary. And my mind is replete with images of people sick with AIDS.
Right. The lesions they show us on TV.
Yeah, these emaciated bodies. I mean, we all saw the movies. We talked about it in health class. We talked about it, while we were hanging out with our friends. Like, it was a really big deal, right?
Yes.
And so I thought, well, what does this community of scientists and doctors and reporters who are saying that the virus thing is a scam, like, well, what on earth do they have to say about AIDS? And so I decided to do a really deep dive and read as much literature as I could on that topic. And my mind was blown. I mean, totally blown. I was shocked at what I found. Totally shocked. I mean, even after doing 10 years of research, I couldn't believe what I found. And I will tell you a little bit now, I guess, for your viewers' benefit. But I mean, go watch our episode on AIDS. I don't want to do a disservice to it. I really want.
That was the one I had to walk away from a couple times and just take a breath, seeing the children in Africa and these people needlessly suffering. It's just remarkable. A couple of the points I would love for you to cover about the AIDS epidemic in particular was this idea of the symptomology. I mean, it's apparently adheres to geographical location.
With AIDS?
Yeah. That people, this was a huge parallel that I, immediately picked up on with COVID, is that the symptomology list was growing by the day. to include diarrhea, stomach aches. There was all this list now that was included in symptomology of COVID. And when you showed that list from AIDS, right? So in America, an AIDS defining symptom was pneumonia, but in Africa, it was diarrhea.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same scam. I mean, it was the original scam in our modern era, right? There were other scams in other eras that led into it, but you have to understand AIDS if you really want to understand what's happening now.
Yeah.
Because there's so many aspects of what's happening today that were developed in terms of manipulation of everything, of language around health that happened then. And so just to give people a little bit of a sense that, wait, maybe there's something serious that this guy's talking about. One thing that shocked me was how incredibly prestigious the voices were who were speaking out against the hypothesis that there was a virus called HIV that caused AIDS. And this list was just a who's who of the greatest minds in science at the time. And I, as a teenager, even as a young adult, I had no idea that all of these incredible doctors and scientists, I mean, we're talking about Nobel laureate after Nobel laureate. And I don't even have a lot of respect for the Nobel Prize. I think it's highly politicized.
Well, now, yeah, David Rasnick taught me about that.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Which is in the documentary as well. Amazing soul.
Yeah, he's an amazing soul. I love David Rasnick. He's a 30-year biochemist who was one of the influential figures to have the courage to say that the AIDS paradigm was totally untrue early on.
I never stopped to consider before I talked to David how tortured people that really loved and had passion for science trying to work in the model were. There's this, he's just like, you can just see the excitement boil up in him when he's talking about science and advancements and possibly being able to cure cancer and like all these really things that he just can't wait to do. And then you realize that he has been stifled in a politicized, corrupt model his whole career. Imagine what these people would have been able to accomplish.
Exactly. I mean, they just destroyed anyone who tried to speak out against them. So just a really quick summary of what are we talking about when we say, oh, there was so much fraud in terms of AIDS. The government, namely a young Anthony Fauci, in 1985, together with a scientist named Robert Gallo, declared, without any scientific backing, that the reason for AIDS, or the reason why we were starting to see these emaciated bodies, these sick men, was that there was a new virus called HIV. And that didn't actually have any scientific support. That was a made-up idea. It was a fictional idea. There were scientific papers that were later published in order to justify that idea and to sell that idea to the rest of the scientific world and, of course, to the medical establishment and then to the lay public. But those papers were pseudoscience. They had no real methodology. And so just to give you an example, Kary Mullis, who was the Nobel Prize winning inventor of the PCR test or PCR process,
it slips into your, it slips in there. It's not a test. It's not a pregnancy test.
Not a test. But who was the Nobel Prize winning inventor of the PCR process, which was being used by the late 80s as a way of claiming that so and so had the HIV virus, was, of course, Carey was, of course, a major figure. And so he tells a story of a time when he was writing a research grant proposal, and he's such a sweet he has such a sweet manner about him, and he says, I wrote that, the first sentence of the paper, I wrote HIV is the probable cause of AIDS, and I put a little I wanted to footnote that, so I put a little one there, and I started to write my footnote, and he said, okay, well, how do I know that? How do I know that HIV is the probable cause of AIDS? What scientific paper actually showed that? And so he starts looking for the scientific paper that shows this thing that everybody already knows, which is that HIV is the cause of AIDS. And he says he couldn't believe it. There was no paper. There was no scientific paper that showed that HIV was the probable cause of AIDS. And here was Carey Mullis, he was at the heart of the scientific establishment. So he not only went searching through every published paper on the topic, and I mean, this is it's his Nobel Prize, discovery that is at the center of this whole thing. He not only goes searching through all the published literature looking for the paper, he starts going to scientific conferences where all the quote unquote leading minds of this ideology are his peers. And he starts asking them, well, what's the paper? What's the experiment? How do we know this? And as he makes clear, there simply was no paper. It was simply declared. And when you think about that, it sounds like some sort of abstract scientific idea, right? But it's actually incredibly pernicious. So once you accept this idea that there is an HIV virus and that it causes AIDS, well, then you've really opened up a Pandora's box of what becomes a really gruesome, mortifying experience for not only hundreds of thousands of gay men, but also much of the world. But you could look at, say, it opens up all sorts of things. So, Celia Farber, who is a reporter that I had the privilege of interviewing for the documentary, she was a young reporter at the time in New York City, and she thought this was a really interesting story. Wow, some of the greatest scientific minds of our generation are all saying that the government's full of shit. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
well,
people want
I'm
to
a
read
young
about
reporter.
that. Yeah.
I'm going to go report this story, not realizing that there was a whole edifice of power behind selling the nation on that idea. And she ultimately was completely, nearly destroyed by that machine. Not entirely destroyed, because she's still writing today, and she's a great writer and beautiful reporter. But the system wants you to believe a very particular story. They put a frame around disease, and they want you to, when you see a person who looks a certain way, they want you to think a certain story about it. And that's what was done with AIDS. I mean, even if you go back and you look at the original 18 case, I think it was 18 or 28 or something cases of AIDS in San Francisco around 1980. These very first cases, they were all declared as a singular disease, AIDS. Well, it wasn't called AIDS yet at the time; it didn't have a name yet. But this doctor noticed that 18 gay men had become sick with similar symptomology in San Francisco, and
Hmm.
he ran a report on all of them. And what popped out to him was that they were all gay.
Right.
And so he decided that they must have caught some sort of sexually transmitted disease because, and Kevin Corbett speaks beautifully about this. He's a PhD nurse who was one of the first AIDS nurses in the world. He worked for Princess Diana's hospital branch in London. Um, that to this doctor, the fact that they were gay, what determined the disease. And so he assumed that it must be that they were passing around some sort of sexually transmitted thing.
Mm.
But when you looked at it, um, he tried to map out all of their sexual relations, and they did this map, and they didn't connect. They did not at all,
So there
right?
were
So then,
people that they had relations with that weren't sick, and there were, it didn't.
exactly, and that
Okay.
weren't connected to anyone else, right?
Right.
And what he completely chose not to look at was that all 18 of these men were severely heavy drug users,
Mm.
massively heavy drug users. And they were using a whole variety of new drugs that hadn't been on the market before.
Wow.
So that he throws away. But the fact that they're gay,
Hmm.
that he likes. Now, what happened, if you talk to some of the um, people who were on the ground researching this at the time, is that these new drugs, these new chemicals had become prevalent in the gay community. And that's why we were seeing this overlap. And uh, the whole nation then jumps to the conclusion that this San
Is a gay
Francisco doctor
disease.
puts
Yeah.
forward, which is that we have a new sexually transmitted disease, instead of asking themselves what is happening in these communities, besides the fact that they have sex,
Right.
right? Oh, but everybody gets
Oh my
hung
gosh,
up
this
on
was a
that.
part of your
That's why.
documentary, which I really was just, made me cry, is that thinking about all the healthy young men that tested positive for HIV and then started on a course of AZT with no symptoms.
It killed.
Mickey Willis, I interviewed him, for his documentary about, a year and a half ago or so now, I think. And he tells a story about his brother, um, young, gorgeous guy, and he tested positive for HIV. And, everyone wanted him to start on AZT. And, he wasn't even sick and started on AZT and died. And they watched him, waste away over time.
Oh, it's such a tragic story. It's such a tragic story, and it
And times that by
Celia talks.
God knows
Celia
how
talks
many,
about. I'm sorry.
times Mickey's story by how many.
Well, it's been estimated. I think it's 300 to 500,000 gay men
Yeah.
were killed by AZT.
Yeah.
That's the estimate. But as long as you believe the cover story that HIV was the cause, then all you have to say is no, no, no. They died from HIV.
Right.
The AZT was just trying to save them. And when you look at the orphans in the Bronx that were experimented on, where they
Mm.
took 30, I believe it was 30 young children in the Bronx and gave them all the so-called HIV, so-called test, and found that they all tested positive for HIV. And they were children,
Hmm.
and they were perfectly healthy. It
Yep.
was then declared that these kids are in incredible danger because they have HIV and they're going to die of AIDS, and we better do something quick. And so they started them on, this toxic treatment. And the children all died. They were killed. They were killed by this treatment.
Yes.
Perfectly healthy children. And
Yeah, and you can even watch some of the nurses that worked there, their testimony, who, could see what was happening every time they gave another treatment. I can't remember the name of that institution. Do you remember?
I don't remember it either.
It's like Willowbrook or something. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes if I can find it.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And you can read Celia's story that was in Harper's Magazine about a young Black woman in Atlanta that where she was pregnant and very poor and came in for, I think, some sort of gynecological test, and they decided to run an AIDS test on her, and they said, "Oh, you have HIV. You're going to die, and your baby's going to die." But we happen to have this experimental treatment, and it's not approved yet, but we'd like to. They were looking for subjects, and they said, we know you don't have any health care, but we'll pay for it. The government will pay for it, and we'll bring you in. And they killed her. They killed her with this treatment. And they knowingly killed her. The reports are there, and you can read the story in Harper's. But, as long as you believe that HIV is the cause of AIDS, the story will you'll never really understand that.
Right.
And as long as you believe that there really is a SARS-CoV-2 virus floating around making you sick, you're not really going to understand what's happening right now.
Right.
And
you're turned into a soldier as well, like we talked about earlier, because there's this safety component. There's a safety component. So they wrap this whole story in a safety issue. It's a safety issue. So there's fear involved, which makes it difficult for you to consider other possibilities when it comes to the topic. And that was definitely true with AIDS. Even heterosexual people, maybe breathed a little sigh of relief when they thought it was just impacting homosexual people. But at the same time, there was still this fear that sexually transmitted, it could still affect them. So there was always that fear. It was you have to be safe, right? There's a safe sex campaign rolled out right around that time as well. And it's the same thing with COVID. You have to be safe. It's about safety. So forego the trying to figure out the facts and the truth, because safety, you have to stay safe. You have to keep other people safe. We have to let go of that.
Yeah, I mean, they'll kill you with that motto.
Yes.
They'll kill you with it. It's totally mind-boggling, but it's true. And it's only scary if you're still sort of half bought in. Once you realize that it's just garbage, it's just nonsense, it's just the latest McDonald's commercial, you're like, oh, right. Well, I feel bad for those people, I guess. But that's it, and it's super tragic, but that's the reality, is that they'll sell you on the fear.
Yeah.
And the biggest fear is the virus. It's floating out there. It's going to kill you. It's going to get you.
Right. In one of the parts, I think it's monkey business, you really went into polio. And I want to talk a little bit about this, because at the beginning, maybe 6-7 months into it, I did see some doctors that were bravely, pushing, hey, because I'm sure you got told it. Well, yeah, what about polio? What about polio? If I had a dime for every time someone argued with me about polio, I'll tell you.
Seriously.
It's so okay, so I think it was Dr. Batar at the time, which was really impressed that he had the courage to put that study out about DDT and polio and its correlation. But your documentary really hits that nicely and goes through it very good. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'll try to do this as quickly as I can. Of course, the story that we're all told is that there was a polio virus that emerged, at the beginning of the 20th century, and that's why, all of these children became paralyzed, and people became paralyzed, and some of them died. And that's a nice story, just like Santa Claus is a nice story, and fairies and unicorns, and whatever the latest horror movie you want to go see. These are all nice stories. What's not true is that there was ever any serious science behind that story. There were essentially two experiments that were done in scientific labs to justify that story. The first of those experiments was that they ground up spinal fluid of paralysis victims, and they injected it into all sorts of animals, and they couldn't see any paralysis from that. And they tried everything. Oh my God, they tried like chickens and rabbits and goats and monkeys and all sorts of things. They couldn't, nothing worked. It didn't seem to.
They could not make the animals sick with the contagion.
No.
Right.
Even, I mean, we're not talking about breathing or anything like that. We're talking about
injecting,
binding, spinal fluid. But they finally had an experiment where they ground up the spinal cord of a paralysis victim, and they cut a hole in the skull of a monkey, and they injected that fluid directly into the monkey's brain. And they did that on a couple monkeys, and one monkey became paralyzed and one monkey died. And they said, aha, you see, it is transmissible. It is that fact. Now, what we know now, of course, is that if you cut, I would like to think that actually, I tend to think
before
that they knew at the time as well, but we definitely know now that if you cut a hole in the skull of an animal and you inject a lot of protein into their brain, that there is a response. There's a natural response, and that part from the body to it's an allergic response, and it will paralyze you, and it has nothing to do with what is in that protein matter. It's
right.
just
it's essentially an injury.
Yes, exactly. It's sort of like saying if you write the word polio on a baseball bat and then you whack somebody in the head with it, and found that it's the word polio that was on the baseball bat that made them fall.
Right.
Not a good, that's not science. That's not the scientific method. Okay, the scientific method is to isolate your independent variable and then do an experiment to see if it causes a change, and then try to figure out if there's any other variables at work. Well, that's not what they were doing. They simply did this injection and said, aha, polio is a virus. So that was the first, that was the beginning of this so-called science behind polio. And then the second major experiment was in 1954, so-called experiment. And that was the claimed isolation of the polio virus. And this is also, it's pseudoscience, it's nonsense. And let me stop there, because and go back and talk about what else was going on, and then we'll lead our way up to 1954.
Okay, great.
So while this sort of backwater scientific group is saying, aha, we found the polio virus, and we know that we've done that by injecting ground up spinal fluid into monkey brains, we are seeing the rise of childhood paralysis in the country. I mean, this is real, right? We actually are seeing this. But what that actually matched with was the use of new chemicals in the country. And the first of these was lead arsenic. And it was a new compound that had been created in Paris, which is in the 1800s is kind of the heart of the chemical industry. It switches over to the United States soon after, but there's this chemical, it's called Paris green, and it's used for all sorts of different things. And what we saw very clearly is that with the rise of the use of this chemical, we see the rise of childhood paralysis. And it's not sort of abstract thing. It's in the exact towns and villages where this chemical is being used that we see the paralysis. And so, for instance, there was a tannery in Massachusetts, I believe, where they could use they could use this to work the hide better, to make leather and whatnot, and then they would dump the runoff in the river that the tannery was on, and it was right there that we saw the first outbreak of polio, and which was the name for essentially sudden childhood paralysis, right? Oh my God.
Right.
And if you read the reports from the time, they're very aware that this doesn't look like some kind of contagious thing passed around. This looks like some kind of poisoning. And they talk about how there's many children that have come to that town and interacted with the sick children, but none of those children become sick. It's only the children living in this town that are getting sick. We later learn that there's a compound, a chemical compound in lead arsenate that actually causes the deterioration of your spinal cord. So there's a very clear and obvious mechanism. This compound causes exactly what we're seeing in the children. And as time goes on, and this chemical or variations of this chemical are used more and more widely, because it starts being used as an an insecticide.
Right. I remember seeing your footage in there is just startling when kids are running in the soccer field and they're blowing DDT on them, and then their advertisements for "no bugs on me."
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. We're just like, how could we be so stupid to think that you could, inhale all that and just be running around in it? Kids were, you say in the documentary, I don't want to give too many spoilers here, but it smelled like bubble gum and kids were running through it like it was, oh yay, here comes the truck. Oh my gosh. It's difficult to watch.
It's an upside down world, sadly. And, because people were being, sold this complete counter narrative, which was that actually the childhood paralysis was due to mosquito bites. And that the best thing to do was to protect yourself by spraying you and your loved ones with DDT, which was a variation of this lead arsenate poisoning. And it becomes particularly bad when it's mixed with a fat, I believe, which is why the spraying of it was probably not actually as causally connected as the spraying of farms, and then the cows would eat the grass or drink water that was heavily polluted with this stuff, and then it would get concentrated in the milk and sit in the milk fat of the cow, and then the kids would drink that milk and eat that ice cream. And that was more likely the delivery mechanism. But it's just terrifying to think about how widespread it was. But if it's terrifying for you and me to think about how widespread it was, imagine what it must have been like to be an exec at Dow Chemical and start reading these reports that possibly this is causing childhood paralysis, because it was not unknown that this was going on. And what some of the doctors point out at the time is that veterinary medicine was acknowledging the fact that the spraying of DDT and other organophosphates and lead arsenates were causing paralysis of baby cows. And So there was a real effort in veterinary medicine to try to limit the spraying of DDT, but it was not possible politically to say those same things about human babies. That, on the same farm, if we saw baby cows being paralyzed and we saw baby children being paralyzed, well, it couldn't possibly be from the same cause. So there were doctors at the time who tried to speak out.
And I think that's important that we mention that too, because it's the same thing that's happening today. We have doctors that are speaking out and they're being silenced, they're being ridiculed, they're being stripped of their credentials, unable to practice. The same thing was happening. Like you featured Dr. Biskind, I think his name was, in 1949 with his article.
Yeah, the poison cause of poliomyelitis. And I think the obstructions to its telling or something like that. There were a few doctors, Morton Biskind, Ralph Scobie, and others who this was completely obvious to. And they tried to get the word out. And they laid out a case that was, pretty ironclad in the literature at the time, looking at all sorts of aspects of the paralysis of these children. I mean, and they were blocked politically from being given any real print space and having that story get out there. So instead of this obvious mass poisoning of the nation, the medical scientific establishment decides to run with this other theory that actually there's something flying around that's causing the sudden paralysis of children, and it's all based on up until the 1950s, it's all based on this idea from this monkey drilling a hole in a monkey's brain. Well, there's a hesitate to call him a scientist, but there's a scientist in 1954, John Franklin Enders, who writes what becomes a groundbreaking paper saying that he has actually, quote unquote, isolated the polio virus. He's found it, right? Because it's just a figment of imagination up until 1954. It still is a figment of imagination, but now we add another layer of the narrative of the story. So, at first they injected it into the monkey's brains. They're saying something's in there, something in that thing that we injected into the monkey made him paralyzed. You see, and if you had injected peanut butter into that monkey's brain, he would have become paralyzed. It doesn't mean that if you eat peanut butter, you will become paralyzed. You just can't inject peanut butter into your brain through a hole, right? But no matter, there's something in there, these scientists are saying. And so John Franklin Enders in 1954 comes up with another absurd experiment in which he claims that he's proven it as well. And that experiment, and we really sort of visualize all of this in the documentary. I mean, I paid this visual artist in Argentina to really kind of cartoonify it and everything for people, so that, because it's so absurd, but it's kind of hard to wrap your head around unless you can see it in front of you. But what Enders does is he takes the fluid of a paralysis victim, and he puts it onto like a little bowl of monkey kidney cells. Okay, so he has a cage of monkeys, and he kills the monkeys, and he grabs their kidneys, and he takes little bits of the kidney, and he puts that in a little bowl, and then he takes little bits of the spinal fluid of I believe it was the nasal swab even of a polio victim, of a paralysis victim, and he puts that on the monkey kidney cells, and then he adds penicillin into that mixture, and then he adds milk, and then he adds sheep blood, I believe, and then he adds baby cow blood, and then he mixes all of that around, and then he waits. And after, I think it was a couple of days, it might have been a couple of hours, some of the monkey kidney cells begin to die. And he says, aha, I know why the monkey kidney cells died. It's because that first fluid that I put in there was from a polio victim. Thus, I have proven that there was something in that polio victim's fluid that made the monkey kidney cells die. And thus, I have proven polio is a virus. Now, if that didn't make any sense to you, you're smarter than you give yourself credit for, I would say. In fact, John Franklin Anders wins the Nobel Prize at this point in his career for a very similar experiment that he'd done on measles. And this experiment goes on to become the foundation of the field of virology. And if you read the papers out of Wuhan, the original papers out of Wuhan claiming the existence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus has been found, they are a repetition of that experiment from 1954. That is the level of science that we're talking about. So it's just mind-boggling. Just to point out something so that people are 100% clear on this, John Franklin Anders does admit in that 1954 paper that it might be that the monkey kidney cells died for other reasons. It might be, he admits. He says maybe it's not the polio virus that killed them. Maybe there was something else in this fluid
mixture.
In this mixture. Maybe there's something else going on. We don't know, right? He says, I don't know. But I think the monkey kidney cells died because that fluid was from a polio victim, and we all know that polio is a contagious disease, and because we know that from the last monkey experiment that we did, and thus I have proven that this virus exists. It's total nonsense. It's unbelievable when you look at it. But the paper's there. You can read it. You can go find it. You can go read it for yourself.
It's interesting because I think most people still have this, even though we've been through this, this whole thing where they hijacked our language, right? They've changed definition of vaccine. I think that people still really think that they've captured a COVID virus, killed it, and put it into a vaccine, and that is what they're taking. There is no concept to how it is, the virus is mapped in a lab, that it's computer generated. There's no concept of that. When you have discussions with people who really, just go along with the narrative, they don't understand that component, that it's not like a live wild virus.
Yeah, no, this is, it's like when I play old classic Nintendo with my son, one of the games that you can play is Dr. Mario, and you are a little doctor and you have to kill the virus. Like, this is deeply ingrained in our society.
Yes.
If you watch Hollywood movies, there's constant references to the virus. I'm not just talking about Contagion. I'm talking about like movies that have nothing to do with healthcare.
Yep.
You're constantly being bombarded with the idea of the virus. If you watch, the World Cup, in the middle of the World Cup, the announcers talking about, oh, there was a virus going around in the French locker room. So it's just, we're constantly inundated with this idea. And the fact that this is not a scientific idea. This is superstition
Mhm.
that's been proven wrong.
It's the
And
world's greatest marketing campaign.
yeah, it's fabulous as a marketing concept,
Yeah. Invisible.
so it's just shocking. Just to finish up the old thoughts so that people understand, who haven't heard this before. Uh, Penicillin and some of the other things that are added to that first John Franklin Enders mixture is toxic to kidney cells, right? So again, they've added something in this experiment that we know has been proven to kill kidney cells. That has nothing to do with the fluid that was taken from the sick person. Okay? It's just shocking. They never do the experiment without the penicillin. They never do the experiment by adding the fluid from a perfectly healthy person and then adding penicillin to see if the kidney cells also die. Right? That paper is very hard to find. I've never seen a paper where they do that experiment, except because of COVID and the scientists who are aware of this. One of the scientists, who's really a legendary figure, Stefan Lanka, goes ahead and runs that experiment just to show the world. He says, "Look, I'm going to take fluid that we know doesn't have viral matter in it. Okay, I think it's just yeast, and I'm going to add it to monkey kidney cells, and then I'm going to add the modern day versions of penicillin, which I think are streptomycin and something else, and I'm going to show you what happens, and I'll take pictures of it. And here we are, and he takes pictures, and you see the monkey kidney cells die anyway.
Right.
So that's what I mean when I say that the field is pseudoscience. It's storytelling. It's things done, by the wizard behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And then pronouncements and declarations are made to all of us about the danger and how we have to be careful, as you were talking about, because this threat is so real. It's so real that they can show you CGI of it on television, right?
Yes.
And and we all have better behave and listen and do what we're told, because the threat is so pervasive. And really, it's garbage. The whole story is a scam.
What do you see happening going forward? Do you think we make a paradigm shift where we start seeing health for what it is?
I mean, I
Are
guess
you
it depends
hopeful?
on who the we is. I mean, it sounds like
The
you've got it
public?
pretty figured out. You know what I mean? I think that, I mean, what I've seen in my life is that I'm, being introduced to more and more people who are really like thoughtful and interesting, and who have all sorts of things to share about all sorts of topics, and who are living by the values that I respect and admire. And so I find that my life is filling up in a lot of ways with those people, not all the time. But that's what I'm seeing. And so I think that that's the opportunity that exists for a lot of us, is to, um, what I found is, like, by speaking about this and making a film series about it, that I get to meet more and more people who are like like-minded, who want to talk about things deeply and um, understand what's going on. So I don't have no idea. I mean, I think, like, man, I don't know. I'm definitely I go up and down in terms of like, where is the whole society going to go? I mean,
Yeah.
the Johns
There's good days
Hopkins,
and there's bad days.
there's good days and there's bad
Yeah.
days. Exactly. I mean, I think we have reason to believe that, they're going to keep coming at us with this propaganda, more and more and more and more. I mean, that we're just going deeper and deeper into the woods here.
Yeah.
And
If people
there's a
can
lot,
recognize the pattern though, like, so I'm good at, recognizing patterns. And if you look at the polio, what happened with polio, highly politicized, deaths actually went up after they rolled out the cure, the shots, there's some
yeah,
key things that you can see have been duplicated, like with polio, AIDS, COVID. Look at these numbers and you can see that the pattern is there. And perhaps if people can recognize the pattern, that can bring more awareness to the conversation and talk about these points. Why are deaths going up after people have, the shots? Why are you getting more infected? Why, like, ask some critical questions.
yeah. I mean,
You don't have to drink our Kool-Aid. Just,
right.
I don't want you to drink my Kool-Aid. I just want you to start asking some questions about these patterns. If you go back in history and learn about these events, these health scares, you can clearly put together these patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that, I don't know. I don't have any like ready-made political solutions. I mean, we need some really revolutionary change in this country. I think in the short term, we have to strengthen the communities that we have with people who are willing to be honest, and have integrity, and want to have these conversations without, flying off the wall, or
Right.
um, you know, writing letters to the New York Times, or, whatever it is. And I think that, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, without a doubt, to me. And we're just going to have to kind of hunker down and appreciate the people that are in our lives. Um, it's, I think in the short run, I think in the long run, it's kind of hypercharged mass awareness among a certain segment of the public that will
I
lead
would
to
agree.
all
I think
sorts
there's the
of
lowest trust in
knowledge.
the medical system that we've ever
Oh
had.
yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's so low. I mean, trust in the media, trust in the government, trust in the medical system. It's all at historic lows, I think, right now. Um, and that's fantastic. I mean, that's like really,
Well, that'll be the driver to change for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Kevin Corbett, the nurse PhD that I got to interview in England. I mean, his point was like, look, we're all going to be really active. We're all going to try our very best to teach people, but at what we know. But at the end of the day, it's the contradictions in their own logic that will become wildly um, obvious to people, and that's what's really going to change the
Yeah.
society at large. Is when they see that, oh wow, if I inject myself with this toxic mess, I get sick, and
Yeah.
those people over there that didn't inject themselves didn't get sick. That's weird. It's not what I was
Yeah.
told. Wow, death numbers are really going through the roof. And so I don't know. There's a little bit of a dialectic, I guess, because there's a lot of people like who are getting sick from injecting themselves and don't realize it and still think it's COVID, or they think it's just random or whatever. Or, th there's a lot of people that aren't going to wake up even if the contradictions like hit them
Yes.
square in the face. But
Yeah.
then there's other people who are starting to say, wow, yeah, something's wrong
Mhm.
here. And I don't even know what it is, but I just don't trust very much
Right.
anymore.
And I
And
think that's an important point. Like, you don't even have to know what it is right now. you can just start the process of trying to learn what you can and maybe stop participating in the narrative, until you can get more information.
Yeah, exactly. And stuff. And as you were saying, like, I think, it's really important that people, I mean, it's important to me. I really hope that people stop wearing these stupid masks.
Yes.
Stop like participating in this fascism, because, it just makes it so much harder on the rest of us.
And it's
oh my God, I don't care
watch.
what they say. Like, just,
yeah.
Use your brain,
Yes.
But at least I can mark myself safe from breathing in my own exhalation.
Yes. Michael, where can people connect with you? Where can they watch the docuseries, and where can they connect with you?
Thank you for asking that. You can go to theviraldelusion.com, theviraldelusion.com, where you can see the whole series. And again, 7.5 hours, 5 parts. You can go to my Substack at The Viral Delusion. You can email me, Mike at theviraldelusion.com. Feel free to do that. I'm always happy to email with people. I hope that we can do that.
If the naturally inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the naturally inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.